When I was younger, I would often fall down the rabbit hole of Pokemon conspiracy theories. Today, I wanted to take a look back at some of them, but through a modern, more analytical lens. Here are 12 of the most famous Pokemon theories and whether I think they're legit. And I've saved the one that I am most convinced is real for last. This first theory is pretty dark, as many Pokemon theories are. This focuses on your rival in the Gen 1 and 3 Kanto games, whose official name is Blue. Throughout playthroughs in all the games but Yellow, anytime he adds a new Pokemon to his team, it ends up staying in his party all the way to the champion battle. Except for one. Blue has a Rattata in Cerulean City, which then becomes a Raticate before the battle on the SS Anne. But then he never uses it again, despite having room in his party the next two battles. The next place you see him is the Pokemon Tower, where perished Pokemon are laid to rest. He even seems to assume that the player is there because one of their Pokemon died. He battles and acts nonchalant, but what if it's a mask? What if he doesn't want to appear weak by showing grief? Grief for his dead Raticate. Some have even gone so far as to claim the battle on the SS Anne is what mortally wounded the Raticate. What if you killed your rival's Raticate? I'm labeling this theory as a maybe. On one hand, I highly doubt the writers would make it so the child player did something so horrible, even if by accident. Blue's insensitive attitude in a solemn place is probably just him being a jerk like usual. He could very well be in the tower just to catch Pokemon and nothing else. But on the other hand, it is weird that he stops using the Raticate. Of all the other rivals, only two others ditch Pokemon they used at one point: Bead and Hop. Bead became a fairy-type gym leader, so he had to stop using his psychic types, and Hop went through a whole character arc intentionally changing up his team. Blue is the only other one, so it is weird. Maybe his Raticate did die, just not by your hand. I do have to acknowledge Yellow version though, since it does kind of mess with this. While he does stop using Rattata like in the other games, it never evolves in Yellow. I don't know why. He also uses, then stops using a Fearow, so maybe he simply just wanted to replace them with stronger Pokemon. But still, there's enough here that I stand by my maybe. This next theory is one that, if you're old enough, you might have heard about on playgrounds back during Gen 1. In the SS Anne Harbor, you can find a lone truck on a dock area only accessible with surf. This at first seems pretty mundane, but it's actually pretty weird for two reasons. And the first is that during normal gameplay, the truck is inaccessible. It requires surf to get to, but this early in the game, you cannot surf yet. Then once the ship leaves after getting the HM for cut, which you need to progress to get surf, you cannot get back into the harbor. The second reason it's weird is that this truck sprite is not used anywhere else in the game, meaning they made a custom image for an inaccessible off-screen location. So how did a theory come about if the location is inaccessible? Well, it turns out it is accessible. By trading in a Pokemon that knows Cut, you don't need the HM to progress and thus can skip the ship. You could also lose a battle on the ship after getting Cut, thus blacking out and returning to the Pokemon Center without triggering the ship's departure, then come back later once you have Surf. There's even a crazier method of transferring in items from Stadium 2 to get past the Saffron City guards and sequence break the whole game. So it's a special custom sprite in a special place you can only get to if you're clever. So there must be a special Pokemon there. And what Pokemon could be more special in Gen 1 than Mew, the Pokemon we knew existed but could not get in the games? Thus, the Mew under the truck theory was born. People would access the truck and try using strength to move it or other ridiculous action sequences to get Mew to appear. But sadly, it never would. This theory is nonsense. In Red, Blue, and Yellow, Mew will never appear by that truck. However, the truck reappears in Fire Red and Leaf Green and is actually tougher to get to since the blackout method no longer works. Then if you overcome the obstacles and reach the truck, you'll find a lava cookie. Game Freak's way of saying, hey, sorry about that whole Mew rumor, have a cookie. Haha,
Garanti, buy and help me.
Okay, with what?
I've started an exciting new project, but I've been unproductive because my diet of hideout cafeteria slop has been awful. Will you hire me a private chef?
What? No.
You'd be investing in my future.
How about instead you try Cook Unity, the sponsor of this video? It's the first chef-to-you meal delivery service, connecting a diverse group of over 70 talented chefs right to you, where meals are made fresh every day in regional micro kitchens, not mass-produced factories.
Ooh, do they have salmon?
Of course they do. Why do you ask?
I just really like salmon.
Subscription options are super flexible with pausing, skipping, and canceling at any time. Meal choices are vast, including vegan, paleo, gluten-free, etc., and they're delivered fully cooked, so all you have to do is heat them up.
So you've tried it?
Yeah, and it was great. We got the Thai yellow curry by Pimpnapat Chancharoen, roasted salmon with pink mashed potatoes by Andres Mendez, and the dragon bowl with grilled chicken by Chris Rattel. All of them were delicious and nutritious, especially the Thai yellow curry, and it made a hectic workday dinner simple. Go to cookunity.com/MNJ50 or click the link in the description and use my code MNJ50 to get 50% off your first order of Cook Unity meals to try them out for yourself.
Fantastic! I'll sign up at once. Now I'll be better nourished so I can work on my novel.
Oh, so that's the project. What's your book about?
The ineradicability of hope despite the futility of effort? Just kidding, it's about dinosaurs in the Olympics. Ta-ta!
For this next theory, let's hop from the games to the anime. Isn't it weird how Ash never aged? He spent 25 years as the series protagonist, traveled all over the Pokemon world, and caught dozens of Pokemon, many of which evolved after a time. Yet, when the series ends and he proves himself the greatest trainer in the world, he's still a small boy. Why? Why, after all this time, is Ash still 10? This theory provides a dark explanation. In the very first episode of the anime, Ash is terribly injured. While being chased by a flock of Spearow, he crashes the bike, not wearing a helmet, I might add. This theory may not exist if he was wearing one. Then shortly after, Pikachu lets loose a thunderbolt as large as a skyscraper, with Ash standing right there. Yet despite all that, Ash walks away from it, only a bit dirty and tired. Or does he? What if instead of brushing it off, Ash entered a coma? Then he dreams or hallucinates all of his subsequent adventures that can go on forever, since while his body ages in real life in the hospital bed, he remains his child self in his mind. Would explain why he can take a flamethrower to the face only to get covered in soot. He can't be hurt because the world is all a dream. Yeah, this one's nonsense. It's just fans like having fun. There's no shot for this kids show they would write such a dark explanation for things. And also, oh, it was all a dream is the worst way to end a story. And Ash's story is over, and he didn't wake up. This next theory deals with the story of Mewtwo, which you likely know by now. Scientists working in the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island cloned Mew, creating Mewtwo, but it was far too vicious. They failed to control it, it wrecked the mansion, and then fled to Cerulean Cave. But they couldn't have done that on their first try, right? There had to be unsuccessful cloning attempts before they created the ultra-powerful Mewtwo. What if they first made something weaker that shared more of Mew's attributes, like using a huge variety of moves or transforming into other Pokemon? Transforming. Like Ditto. What if Ditto is a failed clone of Mew? They have a lot in common. Not only are both purplish pinkish in their normal forms, but they're both light blue in their shiny forms. And hugely, they are the only Pokemon to learn Transform. The only ones. Mew is said to have the genetic code of all Pokemon, and Ditto can copy anything's genetic code. But Ditto is less stable than Mew, that's why it's a failed clone. Mew can use any move just outright, whereas Ditto has to copy the entire enemy in order to use the moves. That would also explain why Mew is a flying cat and Ditto is a blob. And guess where Ditto can be found? In every Kanto game except Red and Blue, it's found in the basement of the Pokemon Mansion, where the cloning experiments were done. They've spread beyond that because Ditto is partially based on the self-replicating amoeba, so maybe they made just one Ditto, but it duplicated itself to spread all over the Pokemon world. That would explain why you cannot breed Ditto with another Ditto. Ditto replicates just by itself. As for my thoughts on this, I think it's legit. There's so much going for it, and yeah, even though the devs say that Ditto is based on just a smiley face, this is a lore explanation. They could have been like, actually this fits. Let's kind of hint at it a little bit, which is why Ditto's found in the mansion from Yellow onward. We're never gonna get official confirmation, but of all the famous Pokemon theories out there, I think this is one of the most airtight ones. Let's do another Gen 1 connection theory. Take a look at Gengar and Clefable next to each other. They both have pointy ears/horns, spiky back areas, and the same roundish body shape. Plus, for a while, Clefable was a normal type compared to Gengar's ghost type, and Gengar likes to inhabit shadows. Could Gengar be a sentient, corrupted shadow of Clefable? No, it's nonsense. I'm sorry, I've always thought this one was silly and dumb. Like, there are some cool famous ones, and this one's just like, they look kind of alike, and that's it? Yes, they have a few similar design attributes and somewhat of a similar vibe, but that's the case for a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon, since many were made by the same designer. There's absolutely no lore tying them to each other. It's just a little fun. And even then, it's like not even that fun. There's way more fun ones. This next theory stems from a strange quote from the Vermilion City gym leader, Lieutenant Surge. He says, "I tell you, kid, electric Pokemon saved me during the war. They zapped my enemies into paralysis." Excuse me? The war? What do you mean zapped your enemies? People? You zapped people? But you know, now that he mentions it, many of the adult males in Kanto are in gangs, either organized or not, and the only male authority figure in your hometown is Professor Oak. Neither you nor your rival have your dad around. Is Kanto a country recovering from a massive conflict? Was there a great Pokemon war that decimated the Kanto population, and Lieutenant Surge was one of the commanders that survived? Well, no, because Lieutenant Surge is not Cantonian. He's American? The fame checker in Fire Red and Leaf Green refers to him as the Lightning American, and says he is rumored to have been a pilot while home in America. He used the electricity generated by Pokemon to power his plane. Hold on, America? Where is America? Unova? Alola? What? In reality, this is a side effect of the Pokemon world and the real world not being so explicitly separate back in the day. Another example is Mew being found in Guyana, South America in Gens 1 and 3, but deep in the jungle in Let's Go. But still, in official Pokemon material, Lieutenant Surge mentions a war, which means it happened. That's why this theory is a maybe and not nonsense. Lieutenant Surge did not fight in Kanto, like against invading Johto or something like that, but something happened somewhere. For this next theory, have you ever noticed how similar Venonat and Butterfree look? Red eyes, purple body, similarly shaped antenna and hands, and even long bunny-like feet. Odd, considering that they're completely disconnected evolutionarily. But what if they weren't meant to be? What if it's a mistake? Gen 1 is full of errors, so maybe this is another one. Maybe Butterfree and Venomoth were switched, meaning Venonat was originally supposed to become Butterfree, and Metapod was supposed to become Venomoth. I personally think it's nonsense. Venonat is attracted by light at night, which is a very moth thing to do. And even if that was retconned after the error, that would be an enormously massive mistake and oversight to make, which I just highly doubt, even with all the errors of Gen 1, which are mostly just coding errors anyways. And besides, sometimes Pokemon just look similar. Look at Lovedisk and Alomomola. They are not connected at all, which is weird, but like, it's intentional. As for why Venonat and Butterfree look similar, like I said with Gengar and Clefable, a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon share design similarities because you'd have one person make a ton of Pokemon. So some days they might have just been kind of tired and just like copied the antenna over from one to the other and just didn't really think about it. Or slapped a horn on a fish and called it a day. This next theory is similar to the Ash coma theory, but less depressing. Essentially, it's another way to explain why Ash doesn't age. Ho-Oh's Diamond Pearl Platinum Dex entry says its feathers are in 7 colors. It is said that anyone seeing it is promised eternal happiness. Eternal happiness is what matters here. What would make Ash happy? Adventuring with and battling Pokemon. How do you do that eternally? Stop him from aging. In short, Ash made a wish on Ho-Oh. It is certainly less depressing than the coma theory and therefore has more merit, but I'm still calling it nonsense. I can't help but think of Occam's razor. The simplest answer is the most likely one, and the simplest answer is that Ash just didn't age because they wanted a weekly episodic series as opposed to a single enclosed story, so they could maintain continual interest and print money, which they did for over 25 years. This next theory focuses on the mythical Pokemon Genesect. Genesect was an ancient bug Pokemon that Team Plasma revived and modified, outfitting it with metal armor and a pretty sick cannon. But Genesect is this new Pokemon's name. What was it before? What was the prehistoric Pokemon that became Genesect? It could be one that we've never seen and never will, or it could be a Pokemon that we're already familiar with. This theory claims that Genesect was a Kabutops. There are 3 data points to support this, and then 1 potential hang-up. First, they have similar body shapes, with any subtle differences explained by the technical modifications. Second, Genesect was feared as the strongest of hunters, and most of Kabutops' dex entries talk about its vicious hunting. Third, Genesect is said to have existed 300 million years ago, and while none of Kabutops' entries say exactly when it lived, several of Kabuto's specifically say it lived 300 million years ago. They look alike, behave alike, and lived at the same time. But the hang-up is that Kabutops is not a bug type, and Genesect is explicitly stated to be an ancient bug Pokemon. But there is an explanation for this. Until Gen 8, fossil Pokemon were always rock type. But for many, this seems to be because they were revived from a fossil, not because they have any rocky attributes. Like, look at Archeops. What about this has anything to do with rocks? So Kabuto and Kabutops could be rock type today just because they were revived from fossils, and then water type because they're aquatic. But 300 million years ago, they could have been water bug type because of Anorith and Armaldo. These prehistoric bug-type Pokemon are based on the Anomalocaris, a prehistoric arthropod. Kabuto is based on trilobites and horseshoe crabs, and Kabutops is based on Europterids. All 3 of what I just mentioned are arthropods, as are crabs, and Dwebble and Crustle proved crabs are bugs. The bug type is basically the arthropod type. Plus, Kabutops learns X, Scissor, and Leech Life, the latter by level up, and it used to get Fury Cutter. So could Genesect's ancient form have been a water bug type Kabutops? I think it's legit. We'll never get full confirmation, but like there's just so much going for it that I'm comfortable believing it. Next is another Gen 5 related theory. Have you ever noticed how strong of a connection N and Zoroark have? They both have long, spiky ponytails, and N can understand Pokemon, something normally only Pokemon can do. But more significantly, a Zoroark appears at times when you would expect N to. In Black 2 and White 2, players can use the Memory Link feature to connect a save file of black or white. This unlocks several features in the sequel games, the most significant of which are flashbacks. These stories are normally all told by characters present for the events, but one flashback story is initiated by a Zoroark that does not appear in the flashback. Only 2 grunts and N do. Additionally, when delving into the ruins of Team Plasma's castle, a Zoroark guides you down into it, only for you to find N instead. Zoroark's whole thing is making illusions, and not just of Pokemon. It can absolutely disguise itself as a person. What if that's what's happening here? What if N isn't a person? What if N is a Zoroark? Some might say that Zoroark's inability to speak could ruin this, but I don't actually think that's true. In Lost Lorn Forest in the sequel games, you have a full conversation with a guy who ends up revealing himself to be a Zoroark. As for my thoughts, I'm giving it a weak maybe. I'll admit, it's weird. They're laying it on thick with this connection. It could be a very elaborate ruse, but I actually think there's a more likely explanation. The Zoroark is N's friend. In Black and White's opening credits, we see N as a child alongside a Darmanitan, Woobat, and a Zorua. N rotates out the Pokemon he uses constantly, releasing Pokemon once they've helped him once, but maybe this particular Zorua, then Zoroark, formed quite an attachment to him, and thus has stuck around to help him out for longer than most. It participates in the climactic battle in Black and White, but then does its own thing, popping in to help out N when it sees fit. Maybe the backpacker in Lostlorn Forest is that exact same Zoroark. We'll never know for sure, but it is super weird how often we see Zoroark near N, despite the fact he only uses it in battle once. This next theory is a sad one. Cubone is a tragic Pokemon, morbidly wearing the skull of its dead mother. But strangely, Cubone seems to have a significant connection to a seemingly unrelated Pokemon aside from the fact that it's quite motherly, Kangaskhan. Cubone and Kangaskhan are often found in the same place. In the Johto games and Let's Go, they're both in Rock Tunnel. In X and Y, they're both in Glittering Cave, and on the Isle of Armor, they're both in Warm-Up Tunnel. In Wela Volcano Park, not only are they both there, but Cubone can SOS call a Kangaskhan to help it in battle. Now, Cubone doesn't really look much like Kangaskhan, at least not the mother. But look at the baby. This art here, the best official look we have at what Cubone looks like under the skull, does bear a resemblance to baby Kangaskhan. Additionally, you can never encounter a baby Kangaskhan separate from its mother. That's because the mother is extremely protective. But what if she dies? Does the baby die too? Or does it adapt? Forced to carry on alone, it takes its mother's skull, changes typing and species, and ends up evolving into a totally different Pokemon when its mother's skull fuses to its head. Maybe Cubone is an orphaned baby Kangaskhan. This seems pretty legit, but like Cubone's mother, I gotta punch some holes in it. I'm sorry, that was way too dark. There is a huge problem with Cubone being a baby Kangaskhan. We've already met Cubone's mother, and it is not a Kangaskhan. The Pokemon Tower has wild Cubone, and the ghost that you have to defeat to progress the story is a Marowak. Doesn't have a gender since no Pokemon did in Gen 1, but in Gen 3, the Marowak is explicitly female. It's clearly intended to be the slain mother of a Cubone that lives in the tower. Then in Let's Go, the cutscene makes it even more explicit that the Cubone your rival ends up adopting is the child of this dead Marowak. There's a tearful goodbye and everything. Then Pokemon Origins even shows the mother Marowak defending Cubone from Team Rocket before dying. Although the Cubone is already wearing the skull in this scene. Also, if you hatch a baby Cubone, it already is wearing the skull. Just like a baby Kangaskhan hatching with the baby already in the pouch. These Pokemon frankly have never made sense. As for why Cubone and Kangaskhan are so often found in the same place, I think it's simply Kangaskhan's maternal instincts. In Wela Volcano Park, Kangaskhan hears a motherless Cubone literally crying for its mom, and it shows up to protect the baby. This theory is fun, but it's nonsense. Without question, Cubone's mothers are Marowaks, and they always have been. It's time for the final theory of the video. The one I believe to be the most legit famous theory. And its story starts in Johto. 150 years before the events of the Johto games, lightning struck the brass tower, igniting it. This caused Lugia to flee to the Whirl Islands, while Ho-Oh took off from the nearby Bell Tower. While no humans died during the catastrophe, 3 Pokemon tragically died in the blaze. The fire was soon put out by a sudden rainstorm, and Ho-Oh returned briefly to accomplish one task, reviving the fallen Pokemon as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, representing the lightning strike, the fire itself, and the rain after. But what were the Pokemon that died? They weren't legendary before they died, so they had to just be regular old Pokemon. This all happened in Ekritique City, so maybe they were Pokemon that were popular there, used by, I don't know, famous dancers, wearing kimonos. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune were Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. This works super well because of how much the evolutions have in common with their legendary counterparts. Obviously, the types already match, but it goes even deeper. All the beasts are cat-like, as are the evolutions. Jolteon and Raikou are both yellow with white manes. Flareon has a yellowish tuft on its forehead, and Entei has a yellow crest in the same place. Flareon also has the poofiest fur, and Entei is definitely the hairiest of the three. Vaporeon has 3 fins on its head, and Suicune's crest has 3 points. And it's not just appearances. Jolteon and Raikou have very similar stat spreads, and both give 2 speed EVs. Flareon and Entei both have attack as one of their best stats, both giving 2 attack EVs. Vaporeon and Suicune don't match up as nicely, but both of them provide EVs only in bulk-related stats. Also, what's super crazy is the abilities. Jolteon's, Flareon's, and Vaporeon's regular abilities are Volt Absorb, Flash Fire, and Water Absorb. While the beasts all have pressure, their hidden abilities are Volt Absorb, Flash Fire, and Water Absorb, in Gens 5 and 6 only. They were never made available legitimately with those abilities. Which proves this theory is real! They're covering it up! It's a conspiracy, and I've uncovered it! The beasts were evolutions, and nothing will convince me otherwise! Go away! You're making things weird. If you enjoyed this video, check out my video on the 21 most annoying Pokemon to evolve. If you haven't played Pokemon in a while, you are in for it when you see how infuriating some of these newer methods can be.